Nimdzi Live Learning, that is. It's Workshop Wednesday. Nimdzi Learning workshops and events cover localization processes, strategies, industry intelligence, best practices, and language technology. The Nimdzi Learning experience will give you and your global team the tools you need to take your organization to the next level. Our offerings cover localization project management training, localization QA training, sales process training, translation resources, and much more. Explore our ever-expanding selection of training and development options and see which one is right for you and your organization. If you have not already done so, then make sure that you're subscribed to Nimdzi, either on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, your social media of choice. We also have some really, really useful newsletters that our marketing team puts together. And apologies, I'm joined by my co-host today, Samson and Delilah. They may be chipping in here. So yeah, we'll see how that goes today. Today, we are talking about creating engaging presentations, and this has been a topic that's been requested a couple times. I've been avoiding it just because there is so much to talk about when we're talking about creating engaging presentations. But finally, I've been prompted to put something together. I gave a short, condensed version of this workshop to my team last week when we were on site in Slovakia. Nimdzi Insights did an all-hands meeting. We really take that seriously every year. We try to every year, global pandemics allowing. Every year we get together as a team, bring everybody together and focus on our strategy, our vision, how we can better serve our customers, and just take a conscious approach to building our culture here at Nimdzi Insight. So that's where I was last week, and today we're doing this Workshop Wednesday because I'm fighting jet lag. And I think the best way to do that is to jump right in and start doing some live streams. Live streams are always the answer for me. It's because it's what I love. A little bit about me. My name is Tucker Johnson. I'm one of the co-founders here at Nimdzi Insights, co-owner of Multilingual Magazine, Multilingual Media, author of The General Theory of the Translation Company. I teach some lectures at different universities around the world on translation, localization, internationalization, all of that stuff. And of course, I am the host of Nimdzi Live, which is the program that you are currently watching now. But this is a special segment of Nimdzi Live that we try to do every Wednesday called Nimdzi Learning Workshop Wednesdays. So these Workshop Wednesdays are basically just a snippet of what we do here in our Nimdzi Learning department. We offer workshops, training, e-learnings, asynchronous e-learnings, office hours, and all sorts of different support for our clients around the world to help them level up their team. We figure you're responsible. If you are someone who is responsible for the professional development of your global team, reach out to us because we can certainly help you with that. We've got a whole library of courses here that are just begging to be ordered by you for your global team. And I'm not the only guy that does this, by the way. We have a whole team of experts. I'm just the guy with the stream deck, so I get to take credit for a lot of these courses and give them to you. Now, this is an interactive workshop, so I'm going to be bringing your comments up here on screen when I can. I don't see the comments on screen because I've completely revamped everything, but I will be watching the comments. So if you have questions, comments, any of the above, then make sure to drop those in the comments on whatever social media platform you're watching this on, and I'll try to get to those. So before we get going here, I have some homework for you. There's going to be a not-so-pop quiz coming up. It's not a pop quiz because I'm giving you a heads up right now that I'm going to be asking you some questions after this. I'm going to be asking you, what were Tucker's key takeaways from this presentation? What did I want you to walk away with from this presentation? And I'm going to be asking you, do I practice what I preach? Do I practice what I preach? What are some practical examples that I'm giving you, some tips that I'm giving you that I'm actually implementing as I go through this learning today? Because this, of course, is a presentation. So if I'm giving presentation tips to you guys, then it tracks that I should be using some of those tips as I go through this course today. In this course, we're going to be taking a look at some practical tips for you to do before, during, and after your presentation. So let's say that you're giving a presentation, and let's just take a look at that for a second. When I'm talking about presentation tips, you could be giving a keynote speech to a whole room of people at an industry conference, or you could just be giving a weekly report out to your management team. It doesn't really matter. These tips are going to be useful regardless of what the format and modality of your presentation is. So keep that in mind. This isn't just for the TED Talkers out there. This is for anybody who wants to learn some practical tips for before, during, and after your presentation. We're going to take a look at engaging our audience to increase learning retention. And we're going to do that through things like questions and activities, as well as repetition. We're going to understand the importance of audience-focused and not presenter-focused presentations. We'll talk about what that means here coming up. And how to tastefully use repetition to drive home your key points. You see what I did there? Repetition, people. Repetition. We're going to break this up into 3 main sections and a bonus section that, if we have time, I'm going to get to. So the first 3 sections on preparing. So before the presentation, we're going to talk about what to do during the presentation, and then, of course, after the presentation. And if we have time, we'll get to these bonus tips, just a fun little thing that many of you have probably seen before, on overcoming fear and intimidation. Spoiler alert, power poses, people. I love me some power poses. So let's get right into it, shall we? Lesson 1, preparing for presentation. Now, remember, there's a not-so-pop quiz coming up here, so if you'd like, take out pen and paper, take out something to take some notes on, and be jotting stuff down as we go through this. And I don't have a deck for you to follow through along with me today, but I will be posting the deck after this if you want to go through it, or if you're watching this as a recording, because I didn't announce this one. I announced this one about 15 minutes ago. So if you're watching this as a recording, go check the Nimdzi Insights LinkedIn page and scroll down, look at the recent activity, and I'm going to post a PDF version of this deck for you guys to look at. So in Lesson 1, we're going to be looking at defining the topic of a presentation. We're going to look at storytelling and how to do that with your agenda. We're going to talk about scripting. To script or not to script? That is the question. We're going to look at how to effectively and efficiently rehearse and prepare for an upcoming presentation, and how to introduce yourself. Why introduce yourself in a presentation? But of course, we start with picking a topic. So picking a topic in a presentation is super important. It's super important. And, they have this saying, don't judge a book by its cover. Well, that's a great thing to try to do in your own personal life. But the reality is people judge books by their covers all the time. And in fact, that's what covers are for people to judge your book by it. And a presentation is no different. People are going to judge your presentation by its title, especially in what I would call a competitive environment. So let's say that you're at a conference and there are dozens of other presentations for people to choose from. A lot of times you'll go to a conference and they'll have 3 or 4 different tracks running at the same time. So you have to sit there and look at the agenda and understand which of these 3, 4 presentations am I going to attend in the next hour. And people have limited time. They're going to make that decision based upon your title and based upon the description that you provide for that presentation. So titles are super important. Topics are super important. And an effective title is going to have 3 words. 3 words. Now, that's the ideal. I fail all of the time. Let's see how I did. What is the title for this today? Let's go back there. Look at that. Create engaging presentations. Bam. If I have 3 words, I can slap that on a thumbnail in really big text. It's going to fit on there, and people are going to know exactly what to expect from this. No surprises. People don't like surprises in a presentation. They want to know what they're going to be getting out of the experience. So 3 words are ideal for the title. You need to focus on things that your audience wants. What does your audience want? What does your audience need? A presentation is not about you. A presentation is not about what you want to talk about. It's what your audience needs or wants to learn about. So you need to focus on that. Does your topic solve a problem that they are trying to solve or that they're currently dealing with, right? And if so, does your title effectively convey what problem you're solving? Some titles, now this is kind of a controversial one, but some titles can focus on FUD. For those of you that know what FUD is, FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So if you're focusing on a problem that the client has, then you can kind of key in on their fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I'm not a big FUD guy. I'm not crazy about using FUD as a way to gather attention because it's kind of a negative thing. It's kind of a clickbaity thing. I'd much rather focus on the positive thing. So for example, going back to my title, just using that as a practical example, create engaging presentations. That's a very positive title that gets your attention. It's 3 words. I could, however, choose something that's more like how to not bomb. Well, I'm already past 3 words. How to not bomb your next presentation, or how to not bore your audience. Those are both horrible titles, but I'm just using that to illustrate this point right here. And oh, by the way, just try to stay away from these how-to. If your presentation title is starting with how-to, then you've already lost me. I've already moved on. I'm reading the next presentation title in the program. Next, do you have the authority to speak on this topic? And this is something that we're going to get into in a little bit when we talk about the intro slide, how to put together an effective intro slide. But you need to understand, are you the right person to be talking about this? If, people might sign up to hear me talk about localization best practices, but no one's going to sign up to hear me give a presentation on how to change the brakes on your car, because I'm not the expert. I don't have the authority in that. If you don't have the authority, it's a good idea to maybe recruit a co-presenter. And this works for a couple reasons, because number one, they kind of lend their authority to you, and number two, they lend their audience to you. Sometimes people will sign up for a presentation just because they like the speaker. They've heard that speaker before. They understand that they have authority to speak on that topic. And, speakers, influencers have audiences. So by having a co-presenter, you're able to leverage both your audience as well as the audience of your co-presenter. And lastly, is your topic general enough? Is it general enough, or is it too specific? Sometimes I'll sit down to plan out a presentation that I'd like to give, but after working on it for not that long, even like 15 minutes, I'll realize that, well, maybe this is a subtopic. Maybe this is something that belongs in as a sub-lesson in a more general presentation. It's a line that you need to balance between being too general and not general enough, because if it's too general, then it's not going to be super fascinating to anybody, and if it's too general, then it's going to be super fascinating to a very, very small group of people. If it's not general, if it's too specific, it's going to be super fascinating to a very specific group of people. But if it's too general, then it's not going to be really useful to anybody, right? You can either be super, super exciting to a small group of people or kind of exciting to a larger group of people. And that's kind of the line that we have to walk when deciding on what we're going to talk about. So what are we going to talk about? And we kind of alluded to this on previous slide. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's what your audience needs to hear. So we need to pick our topics accordingly when we go into this. Once we have our topic, the first thing that I'm going to do, and keep in mind, these are all just tips that work for me. These are tuck tips, right? I'm not going through a comprehensive list of industry best practices and things that you need to be aware of. These are things that have worked for me, and I've given a few presentations in my day, so I think I'm somewhat qualified to speak on the subject. But if you have other tips, put them in the comments. Put them in the comments so that we can all learn from each other there. But one of the first things that I'm going to do when I have a presentation is I'm going to put together the agenda slide. And this is important for me. The agenda slide comes first. It's not something that I put together after I finish the presentation, after I finish my deck, because the agenda is what's going to tell my audience, and it's going to tell me, what are we talking about today? What are we talking about today? The agenda should tell a story, and people going into your presentation should know exactly what to expect. They want to know how long the presentation is going to be. They're going to want to know what's covered in that presentation. As you can see, I have some sample slides here from presentation that I've just been giving. I usually break it up into two sections. I break it up into my what I call the in this course section, and or takeaways is sometimes what I use for this. And then I'll do the lesson plan, which is the actual agenda. And in this course, I focus on what are the takeaways? Like, what can you, dear audience member, reasonably expect to walk away with if you give me an hour of your time? Because your time is valuable. So what are you going to get back in return from it? So kind of more a general sentiment. And then I go into the actual agenda, which is these are the lessons in this course. And as we talked about already, in this course, we're going to be looking at before the presentation, which is the section we're in right now. We're going to talk about during the presentation, and we're going to talk about after the presentation. So these are some key points for the agenda slide, probably the most important slide in your entire deck. You need to ask yourself, does your agenda tell a story? Can you look, or can someone else look at your agenda slide, and just by looking at your agenda slide, are they going to understand what is the story that I'm going to be hearing today? And if so, what is the moral of that story? Moving on to the next slide, more about storytelling. So, before you even start working on the presentation, you need to understand what your audience is, who's included in that audience, what do they want to know, what are they fearful, uncertain, and doubtful about. And once we have that basic understanding, that basic empathy about the client, what is our 3-minute story? What is our elevator pitch for that? Can we encapsulate a big idea? And if so, can we incorporate that into our agenda? What visuals can we use? A great resource here at Nimdzi Insights is Miguel Sepulveda, who works for us as a consultant. He gives lots of office hours and workshops himself. He's localization director over at King Gaming as well. And he's just a great resource, and I have to give him a shout out because I stole this slide from him here. So are you including data in your narrative? If you're using data, do a quick sanity check. Run it by everybody else. Sometimes if we're using too much data, then we can get too involved with that and not understand how that data relates to the big story. If there's a big graph or a nice, beautiful graph that you want to use with lots of great data, that's great. But if it doesn't contribute to that 3-minute story or the moral of your story, then maybe it doesn't belong in there. You need to kill your babies when giving a presentation. We have our babies that we really want to include. Oh, this is a really important point. I really love this graph. But sometimes we need to kill those ideas in favor of the greater good, in favor of the story. And remember, people resist new ideas. This is kind of related to the concept that we've been talking about of people don't like surprises. They want to know what to expect. They also don't like these new ideas all the time. Help them to understand why a new approach works better by stating the benefits, right? So if you're making a case, then make sure that you are helping them to understand why. Does your story help them? Is your story convincing? essentially, is the takeaway for this one. Now, let's move on. Let's talk about what some people love, what some people hate. Let's talk about scripting. To script or not to script. Now, this is a controversial subject because the general wisdom out there is that if you use a script, then you're going to come off as boring, essentially. You're going to come off as rigid, mechanical, and it's not going to be exciting. It's not going to be engaging. So this is the argument that I hear from people out there when I say you should script your presentation. And so keep that in mind as we go through these bullet points here. Let me build a case for why a script is important here. Number one, you can't proofread yourself when you're winging it. You can't proofread just being off the cuff and being spontaneous. And this is super important. If I script out my presentation, then I can fine tune it. I can make sure I'm hitting my key points on each slide. I'm making sure that I have a story and that story is being effectively conveyed to my audience. I can rehearse. Essentially, I can get feedback on my presentation if I script it out. If I script it out, then I can go get feedback, either sending the script to somebody or running through it with somebody, and they can provide feedback for me. If I'm just making it up as I go along, it's really hard to get that feedback, especially from myself. Next, we speak differently than we write, and that's okay. But a lot of times, if there's a point that you're trying to make or some key takeaways that your audience must walk away with, then we want to write those down so that we're writing them in a coherent way. And people take us more seriously when we're formatting our thoughts in the way that we write versus formatting the thoughts and just speaking. Essentially, it helps us structure our thoughts. Essentially, you can practice it. And lastly, the scripting helps us be confident. And this is the last point I'm going to make. I could come up with some more, but this is the last point I'm going to make in building my case for why you should script a presentation, because confidence is key. And if I'm going into a presentation knowing that I have a script that I can fall back on, the worst case scenario is that I need to go back to my note cards or I need to go back to my presenter notes and read from those, and that's the worst thing that can happen, then I'm walking into that presentation a little bit more confident than if I'm just winging it, if I'm just off the cuff. And you might think that you're not going to be nervous when you go to give a presentation, but I can't tell you how many times that I've felt pretty confident going into a presentation, and then as soon as I get up on stage and they shove a microphone in front of my face and I see the lights on me, that confidence just evaporates. So having a script ensures that I'm not going to get lost. If I haven't convinced you so far that you should script and rehearse your presentation, then please at least do one thing for me. Script and rehearse your introduction and your outro. Introductions are super important when you're when you're giving it the first 1 minute of your speech, of your presentation. People are forming their first impressions, especially if there's people in the room that don't know you or have never met you before. So you got to nail it. And lastly, your presentation outro should be scripted as well. You need to end strong. Otherwise, you're going to end up doing one of these where you finish your last slide and you're like, okay, thank you. That's my presentation. I hope you liked it. Are there any questions? Right? And there's a big difference between that and that's my presentation for today, everybody. I hope that you found some value from it. And now I'm going to open it up for questions. Basically said the same thing, but it sounds very different. And one is rehearsed and one is just winging it. Speaking of rehearsing, how do we rehearse for a presentation? I got some tips for you. Rehearse to yourself out loud. You can rehearse in front of a mirror if you want, but I prefer, rather than doing it in front of a mirror, I greatly prefer recording myself. So why do I do that? Because if I record myself, then I can listen to it and I can play back myself, and I'm going to be my worst critic. So I'm gonna be the person that's criticizing my work the most. So listening to myself really helps me to understand, what do I sound like? Most of us don't even understand what do our own voices sound like, because the way that we hear our voice is different from the way other people hear our voice. You can also rehearse for a colleague or a friend. Ask them for feedback. This is a great thing to do if you have a willing participant in that. It can be kind of hard, though, to find. Everybody's busy. So that's why I like rehearsing for myself. Now, I make the argument here that rehearsing actually makes it sound more natural. So I hear people say, well, if I over-rehearse things, then it's not going to sound natural. It's not going to flow well. And that can be true. Excuse me. If you are, if you have tons of experience, you've given a ton of presentations in your day, and you're good at it. Like my business partner, Renato Beninato, yeah, he does rehearse, though. He does script out his stuff for important presentations, but he's perfectly capable of getting on stage and engaging an audience for a full hour without the use of a script. But he's a professional. He's been doing this for decades and decades. If you're not Renato Beninato, then rehearse. It's going to help you sound more natural, because you're going to have that confidence. You're going to understand what you want to say. And lastly, when you're rehearsing, don't just practice the words of the script. Practice the timing, practice the facial expressions, practice the volume, the jokes, practice the interactions. One word on jokes, though, be careful. Be careful with jokes, because, if you're not, this is where self-awareness comes in. If you can hit jokes and they can land, or if you don't care if they land, you have that confidence to pull that off, then go ahead and include them in your presentation. But, if you're not generally known as the joke guy, then you might want to consider leaving the jokes out of your presentation. Just saying, a bad joke in a presentation might be worse than no joke going into it. Now we're going to get to intro slides, finishing up this section here. And you saw me, I made sure, typically I don't go through my intro slides on these Nimdzi lives, because I feel like a lot of people that are listening to me already know who the heck I am. I'll bring my intro slide up here one more time, just for us to reference here. But if I'm giving a presentation to a group, and there's people in that group that perhaps don't know me, they've never heard of me, they've never watched a Nimdzi live before, then I'm going to introduce myself. Now, Tucker, you say, I thought that you've told us multiple times, you've repeated it, that the presentation is not about you. It's about your audience. And this is absolutely true, but an intro slide, a good intro slide, still needs to be audience focused. It needs to go back to that concept that we also discussed, which is, why should they listen to you? If they don't know you, if you don't know me, and now you're listening to me give a presentation on presentation skills, you need to know, why should I listen to this guy? What kind of experience does he have? So a good intro slide is going to basically give the audience the idea of, all right, this is somebody worth listening to. Let's see what he has to say. And remember, it's not about bragging. It's not about ego. It's not about, look how great I am. It's about setting those expectations for your audience so that they can know what to expect, what level of information that they can expect from you. Some things to include on the intro slide, of course, your name, your job title, what team you work with. Why are you the right person to present on this? And I'm not saying you should just sit there and say, I am the right person to present on this because blah, 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 blah. But it should be clear from looking at your experience and projects that you've worked on, whatever information you need to include in there for them to have a good idea of why you're the right person. Of course, how you can be contacted, and a good picture. A good picture. This is 2022, people. The world is remote. The world is online. We have lost control over our own first impressions that other people are making of us. It used to be a good first impression was a strong handshake and looking someone in the eye. Nowadays, when we meet people, we're meeting them virtually. And I argue that when we meet people virtually, that's not even the time that people are forming first impressions of us. When I get an email from someone I've never heard before or heard of before, haven't interacted with them before, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to go to LinkedIn and I'm going to look them up. I'm going to see what they look like. I'm going to see what their credentials are. What opinions can I form of that person before I've even talked to them for the first time? And my opinions are going to be influenced by a picture. So if you have a photographer friend, have them take some pictures of you, have them take some headshots. Otherwise, go spend $100. Hire a professional photographer. They're not that expensive. You can go out there and hire a professional photographer for $100. They'll get you some good headshots, and it's no different than back in the before times when we would go to conferences and go to the office and all that stuff. You'd think nothing of spending $100. Go to Nordstrom and spend $100 on some nice shoes for the office, or a nice blouse, nice blouses, or suits, or whatever. Well, I don't know, $100 suit. Who knows? But you think nothing of spending money to put your best foot forward in person. It's no different than that. Spend some money to put your best virtual foot forward. One concept I want to present here, it's not something that I've done, but my friend and colleague, Sophie Solomon, who I've worked with before, I'm collaborating with her on some projects right now. She's a big fan of the one slide. And this is basically tells you everything that you need to know about Sophie Solomon. This example that I have here. What does she do? Where is she located? What are her skills? What is her relevant experience? And it's important that it all fits into one slide. It's basically a bullet point CV resume that you can put onto one slide. And I'm not saying that in your presentation you need to go through all of this point by point, but remember, your presentation is probably going to be shared with people afterwards. So this is something that if someone wants to find more information about you, they can go to your one slide and check that out. Wrapping up here, lesson one. Lesson one, of course, was before the presentation, preparing for a presentation. Some points to consider. Titles are important. Short titles that can have big font on a small thumbnail are the best. Those are the ideal to strive for. Avoid using how to in the beginning of your title. It's a way to lose people's attention. Your subject, your topic, should be dictated by your audience. It's not about you. It's not about what you want to talk about. It's what your audience needs to hear. And your audience hates surprises. Does your agenda slide give them a very clear picture of what they need to know? What is the story that you're going to be telling? What is the journey that you're going to be taking them on? How long is it going to take to get there? All of these things. So keep the surprises to a minimum. When it comes to scripting, there's no shame in using a script. I recommend it, especially for important presentations that you need to nail. Even if you don't want to use a script, script it out, because that gives you something to rehearse. You can consistently rehearse it. You can get feedback on that script. And then, if you really hate the idea of using a script, go ahead and throw your script away before you go on stage, before you hit record, before you join the webinar. At least having that script will have allowed you to practice it and to walk into the presentation with some more confidence, knowing that you've rehearsed it multiple times. And lastly, repetition. Even though it is not about you, remember, your presentation is not about you. I keep repeating that. Even though it is not about you, your intro slide should convince the audience you are qualified to speak on the topic. And that is the point of an intro slide. It's not about bragging about yourself. It's about making sure that your audience is taking you seriously before you start talking at them. Let's take a look here. I need to go to the comments here because I've been neglecting you guys. Roderick has been spamming us. Let's see what Roderick has to say here. Roderick says, I once told a joke to grab attention. A presenter should train to vary the voice levels. True. Your voice levels dynamic voice levels can be very powerful. If you've got the audience attention and you're not just speaking in monotone, or you're not just shouting at them, then when it comes to a point that you really, really want to drive home, then take a pause. Get quiet. lean in to the audience, right? It's going to, if you lean in, metaphorically or literally, then the audience is going to lean in. If you get quiet, the audience is going to listen closer to make sure they didn't miss anything. Check the native language of your audience. Good point. Good point. Not just the native language, but also the proficiency of that language. Especially true if you're trying to be funny or trying to use jokes. Some jokes just don't localize well. One-pagers are my favorite. It doesn't fit a slide format, though. Maybe add an estimate length of the presentation. Yeah. So normally I start off a presentation by saying this is going to take me, we have an hour scheduled together. I'm going to try my best to get through this presentation in 45 minutes so that we can leave room for 15 minutes of questions at the end. If there are no questions, then I'm happy to give you guys back 10 to 15 minutes of your time today. And that's kind of a general line that I use. I didn't use it today because, frankly, this is the first time I'm giving this workshop in a public format, and I have no idea how long it's going to take. So I'm breaking my own rules here, everybody. And, yep, Roderick, it's okay that it's just you. Keep the comments section hopping over there. I didn't advertise this one. I don't expect a lot of people to be joining this today because I announced it 10 minutes before I started. So thank you, Roderick, for those comments. Let's move on to lesson 2. Lesson 2, we're talking about what to do during the presentation. And what that looks like is how to observe the audience for signs of engagement, some engagement techniques using hands-on workbooks or assignments, very powerful. How to come up for air, to breathe. We'll talk about what that means. And wrapping it up, the conclusion slide, and reinforcing the learning throughout the presentation. So first and foremost, before we get into this, this shouldn't need saying, but turn on your webcam. Turn on your webcam. If you're the one talking, if you're the one presenting, and it's in a virtual environment, you need to let them see you. Otherwise, you've lost your audience. You haven't even won your audience over in the first place. So turn on your webcam, and also, if you can do so without seeming too pushy, ask your audience to turn on their webcams as well. I can't tell you, some of you out there that are watching this recording or watching this live know this because you've experienced, some of you haven't experienced this though. Being able to see people's faces during a presentation is really, really, really helpful to just on a subconscious level to make sure that they're engaged, as we're going to see in the next section here, and just to be getting that instant feedback from your audience. One thing that I found, for example, when I started live streaming is that when I'm live streaming, it's even different than giving a virtual workshop. I give virtual workshops all the time, and I ask people to turn on their webcams. But with this live streaming, I'm talking into the void here. I can occasionally click over and see how many people are watching. Roderick and others may be engaging in the comments down there, but I can't see anybody's faces. And I'll tell you, it's challenging. It's challenging. It's a skill that I've needed to practice. So if you have that option of having people turn on their webcam, make sure that they are doing that. Have I mentioned yet, your presentation is not about you. It's about the audience, right? And this is a great tip that I don't use so much anymore. I used to kind of use this a lot, but a great way to start a presentation with a new group of people, if you're giving a workshop or something, and it's also just to break the ice, go around the room. Go around the room and say, hey, I want to go around the room. Everyone has 2 minutes, and give them a prompt. Don't just say, talk about yourself, because people don't know what that means, but give them a prompt. I want to know what's your name, what's your position, and what are you hoping to get out of this presentation today? That's a great one. It's providing you instant feedback on what their expectations are so that you can manage those expectations accordingly. And also, and this is kind of, this is a dirty trick, but it eats up some time. It eats up some time. And if you're supposed to be giving a 2-hour presentation and you only have 90 minutes worth of material to provide, You might want to go around the room beforehand and kind of crowdsource 25% of your presentation. It's a dirty trick, but sometimes we got to do what we got to do. One way that I find super useful to keep people engaged is to ask them to take out a notebook or a piece of paper. Say, hey, look, throughout this presentation, I'm going to be asking you some questions and we're going to talk about it at the end. Or you can just say, hey, this presentation, I'm going to be taking questions and answers at the end. So if you have a piece of paper and a pen, I'd like you to take it out right now. And as we go through, make sure that you're writing those questions down, right? It's not so important why you're asking them to write down something, their questions, their comments, whatever. The why isn't so important as that they're actually doing something. Giving them a task in front of them to write down, to take notes during the presentation is going to help increase their engagement throughout the presentation. You're giving them a job to do rather than just listening to you. Because if I'm just listening to someone and my chat notification starts going off over here, then I'm going to get distracted really easily. But if I'm busy taking notes or busy writing down questions, or if you want to get super fancy and have an actual prepared workbook, I've done that before. It's a great tool to use, especially if you're doing an in-person workshop or something. Bring a workbook. And ask them to be filling out stuff in the workbook. And a great, easy way to put a workbook together is print out your slides and have like one slide for each page. And underneath that slide, have a space for notes. And on different slides, you can ask them to fill out some stuff. So for example, if this were part of a workbook, I'd say, think of a time when you were asked to take notes or when you were given a workbook prior to a workshop. And I want 5 bullet points on how that made you feel. Right? Doesn't need to be fancy, but I'm getting them writing. I'm giving them a task to do during the presentation, right? Also, if people are writing stuff down at the end of the presentation, you can ask for volunteers. Hey, who wants to volunteer and share a little bit about the notes that they took? What are your key takeaways? And then you can call on people to provide key takeaways. Handouts closely related to workbooks can really help visual learners. This is why usually I try to have these PowerPoint decks available before Workshop Wednesdays, because some people really want to be able to sit down and look at things. We have auditory learners they're gonna learn fine from listening to me. These are different learning styles, right? You have your visual learners, they really want something to look at, right? And of course you're going to be presenting your slide deck, but maybe you're skipping around a lot in your slide deck and they want to go back and reference previous things. It's really going to help increase the accessibility of your presentation if you're providing those handouts. Closely related to that is the physical learners. I think it's called kinesthetic learning. That's where the workbooks come in. Workbooks can be really helpful to help people that are more hands-on learners. Even though you're not doing hands-on activities, you could do hands-on activities, but giving them a task of writing something down is really going to help the people that learn hands-on. They're kinesthetic learners. Now, we said on the very first slide of this lesson that you should turn on your webcam and you should ask other people to turn on their webcam as well. And some things that you're going to be looking for when you turn on that webcam is, are people multitasking? Are they smiling? Are they engaged? Are they laughing? Are they frowning? Are they disagreeing with you? If they're disagreeing with you, great. If they're frowning, great. It means they're engaged. Engagement doesn't necessarily mean that they agree and love everything that you're saying. Engagement means that they're paying attention. So a little controversy can go a long ways. And it also leads to some interesting conversations in the Q&A section. What is their posture? Are they half asleep or are they leaning forward? Are they paying attention? Are they having side conversations? Are they typing on their computer? Are they making eye contact, right? Now, this is more of an in-person thing, but if you're going in person, be checking in with your audience members individually. By checking in, I just mean making eye contact, going around the room. making sure that you're engaging everybody. Don't just talk to the wall. Don't just talk to one person who's engaged. Make sure because when we make eye contact with someone, they're going to want to make eye contact with you. It's just a natural human instinct. So make sure that you're doing that. Virtual, it's a little bit more important. But not impossible. For example, because I do these online learnings and teach workshops remotely all of the time, I actually have a teleprompter. Hello, teleprompter. So I can actually be looking at my notes right here in the teleprompter, and right behind that teleprompter is a camera lens, which is picking me up and feeding me out live. So it's a trick that I've learned. I think it works out there. I would hypothesize that it works, at least on a subconscious level, because I am virtually making eye contact with my audience, even though I can't see you, even though I'm speaking into the void. So just to quickly go through these, it's really, these social cues are just, you know it when you know it. You know it when you see it. You know if someone's engaged. I can go through a bunch of bullet points on this means that they're engaged, this doesn't. But as human beings, we've evolved to understand what other people's emotions are. So if I show you some pictures, engaged or not engaged, right? If I really wanted to, if I had a quorum of people here in the chat, I would ask you to put into the chat, engaged or not engaged for each of these, just to keep you engaged. Engaged or not engaged? Not engaged. Engaged or not engaged? Not engaged. What do we think? Not engaged. We're just going to rapid fire some of these here today. Engaged? Oh yeah, engaged. Leaning forward, smiling, making eye contact, quote unquote. Engaged or not engaged? Yeah. I'd say engaged, but not very happy to be engaged. Like I said, disagreement and unhappiness is a form of engagement, but at least he's looking at the screen. This person's engaged. Looks like she's talking, right? I had a whole bunch of these that we can go through. Engaged, right? This is, you know it when you see it. You know it when you see it. Definitely engaged, happy, smiling, gesticulating with their hands. Engaged or not engaged? I don't know. Looks like he's engaged, but this is a person that I would say, I'm losing him. He's engaged, but if I better move on to the next topic, because if I don't, I might lose this person's interest. Engaged, smiley, gesticulating. Hi, how are you? Not engaged. This person's bored. Move on to the next topic. Play a video. Do something to get this person back. Make eye contact with this person. Ask this person a question. Give this person a task to do, because they are not engaged. Same with this gentleman right here. So, a lot of this is kind of recap of what we talked about. Ask questions to your audience. If you see people that are not engaged, let's say you see this gentleman, you're on the verge of losing this person. What are you going to do about it? Ask questions. Specifically, ask questions they know the answer to. People love sounding smart during presentations, right? So don't ask them a bunch of questions that are going to kill their confidence because they don't know the answers to. Ask questions that they know the answers to. Call upon their expertise. Ask them to write something down because they have their notebooks out. You ask them at the beginning to have their notebooks out, right? You can even engage them without, and this is great, especially for large groups, because with large groups, you don't have time to go around and ask people individual questions. You can kind of ask them a pseudo question. I want you to imagine a time, get their brain working, right? Think of a time when you had to give a presentation and you were nervous. You're asking them to do something, even though it's not physical. You're asking them to put themselves in your shoes. Relate to them. I think we have all been in a similar situation and can probably relate, right? Calling people by their names, super important. This really helps when you are able to do that going around the room exercise and having people introduce themselves. Another reason why that's useful is because you know their names now, and also you know what they're experts in, right? So you can call upon their expertise. You can ask them relevant questions to their actual job titles. If there's a lot of people, you can say, drop notes in the chat. Most webinars, most virtual meeting platforms have a chat function. A lot of people are going to be too shy to raise their hand or to speak up during a presentation, but you can say, hey, if you think of something, drop it in the chat, and we're going to get back to that at the end. And then try to make time to get back to that at the end. Give lots of credit, give lots of compliments, right? The presentation is not about you. Give credit to other people. So the slide that I stole from my colleague Miguel Sepulveda earlier, I made sure to give credit to that. Paradoxically, the more credit you give to others, the more credibility you are going to have with your audience. And try to create this atmosphere that we're all in this together. And this is a very subtle trick that you can use. Don't use words like I. Use words like we. We are all in this together. We are learning today. Here are the key points we are going to review today, instead of I will teach you today. Today, I am going to teach you how to give a good presentation. I'm kind of alienating my audience just by saying that. If I say you will learn today, better. If I say we are going to cover these topics today, then it puts us all on the same level, makes it a little bit more democratic. Now, here's an example of how to give yourself a break during a presentation. Let's say you don't have a co-presenter lined up. It's just you. It's just you talking for an hour. Now, if you're in person or if you want to engage your audience, you can give yourself a break by asking questions. Asking questions is actually a really good way to give yourself a mental break, because an hour is a long time to talk. So if you're asking questions and engaging the audience, that's basically like coming up for air. This is the section on coming up for air. Now, when I do these live streams, I always like to include a video from preferably one of my colleagues here at Nimdzi Insights. We have a lot of videos, a lot of like nice short, quick videos over on our YouTube channel, for example. So if I'm giving a presentation on presentation skills, I'm going to go to Nimdzi Insights, and you can go to Nimdzi Insights, steal our videos, give them in presentations, right? And I'm going to find a quick 5-minute video that I can show during the presentation. And I'm not going to do that right now, because I'm going to keep the momentum moving here. I'm watching the clock, and I'm trying not to blow your expectations out of the water as far as how long this is going to take. But if I wanted to literally take a bathroom break, I could play this video from my colleague Sarah Hickey here. Sarah Hickey has a background in radio, so she understands full well how to engage an audience and how to speak into the void. And I could play this quick 5-minute video from Sarah, and I can actually walk away and get a drink of water, refill my coffee, whatever I wanted to do. It's all about how to come up for air. So if you can include videos into your presentation, include them in the middle or towards the end. And the reason I say that is because that's when you're going to need a break. Don't put a video in the first 5 slides, because you need to spend those first 5 slides building rapport with your audience. And we already went over this. The pen is mightier than the mic. And what is your call to action? This is the last slide here we're getting into the last section here on ending your presentation. So what does your audience need to do? Or what do you recommend that they do at the end of the presentation, right? What exercises can you recommend? If they want to learn more about this topic, what are some resources that they can check out? If they want to follow up with you individually and schedule some time, what can they do? Here's my email. Schedule some office hours with me. What is the call to action? It doesn't matter so much what that call to action is. Well, it might to your marketing department, but it matters that you have a call to action, because otherwise they're going to walk away. They're going to say, oh, that was a nice presentation. And then they're not going to think about it again. We mentioned earlier, if you're going to script anything, script the intro, script the outro. Outros are super important. This is where we tie everything together. Because remember, people don't like surprises. People don't like surprises. The agenda slide and the conclusion slide at the end really should be the same slide, more or less. You just reword it, right? So all of the points that you promised them in the introduction that you were going to go over, Here's the point when you just recap them. So basically recapping the key points from each slide. I literally copy my agenda slide and paste it into a conclusion slide, and then I just go into a little bit more detail at the end of each section. Repetition reinforces learning. If you have a story that you want to tell, you have your elevator pitch, you have your key points, you've gone into your presentation saying, I need my audience to walk away with these 3 pieces of knowledge. And if not, then my presentation was not a success. Those are the things that you're going to want to be repeating over and over and over again, because repetition reinforces learning. And also having a strong wrap-up slide helps you to really rehearse and understand yourself what your key points are going into the presentation. So now, appropriately enough, let's wrap up this lesson here. So we talked about before the presentation. Now we've just got done talking about during the presentation. And just to recap what we talked about, webcam on, self-explanatory. We don't need to talk about that too much more. Once again, I'll probably say it again, your presentation is not about you. Include your audience during the presentation. You can do that by asking them to take notes, writing things down. You can make sure to be checking in with them. If their webcams are on, you can be monitoring them for signs of engagement. If you see them starting to drift, you know it's time to move on. You know it's time to ask a question of them. You know it's time to tell them to write something down. If you need a break, build in a break for yourself. I like videos. A break could be going around the room asking them questions. A break could be, here's a quick 3-minute video. Don't play a 10-minute video during your presentation. You will lose people. 2 minutes is the best. 2 to 3 minutes is what I would recommend if you're going to be playing a video in your presentation. End it up with a call to action. What are the next steps? If they want to learn more, how can they contact you? What other resources should they be checking out? And end your presentation with a summary. In addition to your call to action, you're repeating the key points. You're retelling the moral of your story at the end. It should mirror what you talked about when you were on the agenda slide. Just to repeat, and reinforce the key takeaways that you want them to learn from it. Which brings us into our last official section of today's Workshop Wednesday, after the presentation. And it looks like we're going to be going over 1 hour, which is why I didn't set those expectations today, because I didn't know how long this was going to take. So let's talk about what to do after the presentation. But to set expectations now, I will tell you this is the last section. I'm going to skip the bonus section today. The bonus section is just talking about power poses. And I think I have recorded videos out there already talking about that in other workshops. So we're going to finish up here strong with what to do after the presentation is over. Talk about meeting minutes, action items, kind of related to the call to action, asking for feedback, and repurposing our work. So, meeting notes, meeting minutes. Now, meeting minutes are more for meetings, they're not for presentations, but kind of the same concepts applies in regards to my version of meeting minutes or notes that I'm going to send after this virtual workshop today is going to be the deck. I'm going to post a PDF of this deck. It's going to be posted at Nimdzi's LinkedIn page. So anybody who wants can go read that and check out the comments, check out the bonus section and all of that stuff. But let's say you're in a more informal meeting where it's just kind of like a status update or something. Have somebody writing the meeting notes. Preferably that would be you. It doesn't have to be. If you're too busy or it's too much for you to be writing notes and presenting at the same time, then you can assign a scribe to that. However, what I like to say is if it's your meeting and you're the one running it and you're the one that set the agenda and you've rehearsed, then there's no reason why you can't write the meeting notes before the meeting even starts, because it's your meeting. You're driving it. You're in control. And even if the meeting goes off the rails into a direction where you didn't intend it to, if you have the meeting notes already written beforehand, now it's just a matter of editing, doing some light editing, including some stuff from that meeting, and you can send those out. There's no reason why you can't be sending out meeting minutes within 10 minutes of a meeting being finished. I used to, back in my project management days, I used to literally send meeting minutes before people even logged off of the Zoom call. And people love that. I can't tell you, like, that bought me a lot of goodwill with people. People are always amazed at, how did you do that? How do you take such good notes? And I say, well, I write them beforehand. That's how. Remember that everybody's busy. So even if you're putting together meeting minutes, doesn't necessarily mean people are going to be reading them. Just keep that in mind. Keep your expectations in check on this. When you get into action items, your call to actions, your action items, if there's stuff that you absolutely need people to do, we have action items. And we document those in the meeting notes or the meeting minutes, of course. SMART methodology, S-M-A-R-T, is a great methodology to use when you're assigning action items to people. SMART, of course, stands for every action item that you have needs to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. An action item that is not assigned to a specific person and does not have a deadline is not an action item. It's a wish list, right? It needs to be measurable. What is the success criteria? How do I know when this action item has been completed? So lots of information and resources out there on SMART methodology, so I don't need to go into it in too much detail, but keep it in mind when you're putting together your meeting notes. Now, after the meeting, and this is something we do, our customer success team here at Nimdzi does a really good job of following up with people after workshops that we do for our clients or what have you. I think generally after I give a workshop, I don't have to do the hard work. I just show up and give the workshop. So I'll give a workshop, and then afterwards, like Rucha from our customer success team, she'll send out a survey to everybody to understand, did you like the workshop? Did you have any suggestions for improvement? Did it meet your expectations? And it's just a great way it does two things. The first thing it does is it increases and prolongs the engagement of your audience. So rather than just engaging them for the hour that you've spent together, it's engaging them even after the fact. So it's doing its job to even reinforce that learning even after the presentation's over, because it's keeping them thinking about your workshop. The second thing it does is it gives you very valuable feedback. Very valuable feedback. Do you need to include some items in your next workshop that weren't included in this workshop? What's useful, what's not? So the more workshops you do, the better they get if you're receiving and listening to that feedback. A great methodology for that is NPS methodology, Net Promoter Score. I don't need to go into this too much because there's tons of good resources out there that are very Googleable on this, but I like this methodology because it just asks two simple questions. First, it asks, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this service or this workshop, this presentation, to a peer? And then they say 1 to 10. And then if their score is under 9, then you can ask them a follow-up question. What can we do to change that answer to a 10? And based upon the scores that you get, you'll understand who are your promoters. That's why it's called Net Promoter Score. Who's kind of passive, neutral about it, and who are your detractors. So anyone that's 6 and under is a detractor and actually really didn't like your workshop or your presentation very much, right? Lots of best practices out there around Net Promoter Score. You can find out more in other workshops available from Nimdzi. I'm happy to talk about Net Promoter Score for a long time, just because I've used this methodology for years. So contact me if you'd like more information about that. But for the purposes of today's workshop, let's move on, because the last point here in our after the workshop section, and this is repurposing your presentation. So after the presentation, what are you going to do with it? And this is something that we frequently forget to do. We've spent a ton of time, and I'm sorry, my birds are going crazy right now. We spent a ton of time rehearsing. We wrote a script. We created a deck starting with the agenda that tells a story. We rehearsed it. We scripted it out. We recorded ourselves. We listened to that recording. We rehearsed it for a friend. It's perfect. We have visual aids that reinforce learning. Maybe we created a workbook to go along with it. All of these things. My point is, we put a lot of work into our presentation. Are we really going to deliver it once? Spend 1 hour delivering it and then never touch it again? I hope not. I hope that you can get some more mileage out of that presentation. Can it be converted into a blog? I don't care who you are. If you work for a company, that company has a marketing department, and that company's marketing department would love to have you write a blog, right? Can it be converted into a report or some research? Can it be reported into an info? Can it be converted into an infographic? Can you maybe create some short YouTube videos about it? How are you going to repurpose the work? Essentially, this is the question that you need to ask yourself. Don't just drop the mic and walk away and never talk about it again. Maybe if it's reusable content, you gave one workshop to one group. Are there other groups that could also benefit from this information? So if I give a presentation at the ALC conference that's happening down in Las Vegas, Viva Las Vegas, for anybody who's watching that from here. They're still nursing their hangovers down there. It's too early for them. But if I give a presentation at ALC, well, all right, that's great. They loved it, but maybe I can give that same presentation at a different conference with a different audience. That's key. You don't want to repeat stuff to the same audience. It's more of a mindset. Ask yourself, how can I reuse and repurpose this information? Just to go back there for a second. All right, and that brings us, ladies and gentlemen, to the end here. Let's wrap up this last section here. So we've gone through before the presentation, during the presentation, and this last section on after the presentation. We've talked about meeting minutes, sending material afterwards to keep people engaged, prolong the engagement. If we're going to include action items, they need to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. In other words, smart methodology. We can ask for feedback. I like the NPS, Net Promoter Score methodology. There are plenty of other methodologies out there, though. We do that for two reasons. One, of course, is to get feedback and to improve our services. And the second is to continue to engage people, even after the fact. And lastly, don't let your presentation die on the vine. Don't just give it once and then never talk about it again. You can get so much more mileage out of it. Turn it into a blog, write a book, create an infographic, whatever it may be. And that, remember way back in the beginning, I said there was going to be a not-so-pop quiz here. And so I'm going to just bring this up on screen here, and I'm going to go over to our comments here. How am I going to do this? Comments here. And see what Roderick, our participant of one. I wonder if there's more people joining today. But those of you that are watching the recording of this might appreciate some responses to Roderick's comments here. One-pagers are my favorites. It doesn't fit a slide format, though. Yeah, that's why I gave that example from Sophie Solomon on the one slide. Bullet points are necessary. You got to keep it high level. But it's a way to include a little bit more written information than just the basics, name, job title, etc. We talked about adding an estimated length for the presentation. Yep. Do I use PowerPoint? I do not use PowerPoint. I used to use PowerPoint. I consider myself a PowerPoint power user. I used to live and die by PowerPoint. But then I saw the light. Our friends from Down Under founded a company called Canva. And if you don't know about Canva, I am Canva's biggest shill. I should be getting commission from them because I'm always telling people how great Canva is. It's an online tool to create presentations. This presentation today was created in Canva. You can include animations if you're really looking to level up your presentation skills. Go check out Canva, canva.com. There are free options available. We, of course, have the paid version here at Nimdzi Insights. Oh, I'm talking to the void here because I think we lost Roderick anyways at the hour, and that's fine. He says he's about to jump off. Thanks for this interesting presentation. Learned new points again to use. Takeaway. Roderick's going to give us some takeaways here. I love it. So this is great. This is great. So takeaway number 1, agenda slide should tell a story. Perfect. Perfect. I repeated that so many times. I'm glad that you're taking that away. That was one of my key takeaways from this presentation that I wanted you to have. Takeaway number 2, record your own voice and build in variation. Great. Great. If you record your own voice, you can listen to yourself and be your own biggest critic and give yourself some feedback. Takeaway number 3, engage your audience in various ways. That's true. You can ask them questions. You can give them handouts for the visual learners, or you can give them, handouts for the visual learners. You can ask them to write something down for the kinesthetic learners. Lots of different ways to engage your audience. So, if you're watching this as the recording, don't be shy. You can still leave a comment here. What were the key takeaways that I had? When Tucker sat down to give this presentation, what were 3 things that he wanted you to learn and retain after going through this workshop today? Secondly, what were some practical examples that I actually used in this presentation? I talked about repetition. Did I use repetition? Right? I talked about telling a story with the agenda. Did I tell a story with my agenda? Maybe. I don't know. But I won't give any more examples. That's up for you guys to decide. So with that, I think that we're coming to an end to this Workshop Wednesday today. The slide deck is going to contain a bonus section on overcoming fear and intimidation, where we go through some of the one simple technique that I like to use, which is power poses. And if you don't know what power poses is, you can download the slide deck, or you can just Google power poses and learn all about those yourself. So with that, I thank you very much for joining us today on this very impromptu Workshop Wednesday, which served the dual purpose, or the triple purpose, of getting me back into the saddle here on Workshop Wednesdays, helping me test my new stream setup because I've been having problems with it recently, and hopefully curing me of the jet lag from spending the whole week in Slovakia last week. So with that, I will see you tomorrow. There's going to be a pop-up Nimdzi Live tomorrow when I talk to Eric Vogt, an old friend and colleague of mine who always has one of the most intelligent, experienced people in this industry. So make sure to check that out tomorrow, Wednesday, talking to Eric Vogt on the very next episode of Nimdzi Live. And with that, have a great day.